The year 1692 casts a long, dark shadow. It rests heavily on American history. In the small colonial settlement of Salem Village, Massachusetts, a terrifying chapter unfolded. This was the Salem witch trials. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Fear spread like a wildfire. Accusations of witchcraft filled the air. The community was torn apart by suspicion and panic. It was a time of intense religious belief. The devil was considered a real and active force in the world by many. This belief system would soon have deadly consequences for innocent people. These events did not happen in a vacuum. They grew out of a specific time and place. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was a Puritan society. Life was often harsh and unforgiving. People faced constant challenges. They dealt with disease, difficult farming conditions, and conflicts on the frontier. These daily struggles created an atmosphere of anxiety. It was an environment where fear could easily take root. The story of Salem is a chilling reminder of how mass hysteria can grip a community. It shows how quickly reason can be overwhelmed by collective delusion. The trials resulted in the tragic deaths of 20 people. 19 were hanged. One man was pressed to death for refusing to enter a plea. Many others were accused and imprisoned. Their lives were shattered by the events. Families were broken. Reputations were ruined. The Salem witch trials became a stark warning. They showed the dangers of intolerance and the importance of due process. Even centuries later, the story continues to fascinate and horrify us in equal measure. It serves as a somber lesson from the past. Understanding Salem requires looking at many factors. Religious fervor played a crucial role. Social tensions within the village also contributed significantly. Economic disputes simmered beneath the surface. Political uncertainties added to the general sense of unease. Together, these elements created a perfect storm. This storm would lead to one of the most infamous episodes of injustice in American history. We must examine these threads to grasp the full tragedy of Salem. The lessons learned remain relevant even today, in our modern world. The Puritans of Massachusetts Bay Colony lived in a world shaped by intense religious faith. They believed they had a covenant with God. This meant they were chosen people, but this belief also came with immense pressure. They felt they had to live perfectly according to God's laws. Any misfortune, like a failed crop or illness, could be seen as a sign. It might mean God was displeased. Or worse, it could mean the devil was at work in their community. This constant scrutiny of daily life created a pervasive anxiety. Satan was not an abstract idea for the Puritans. He was a real, powerful enemy. They believed he actively sought to corrupt souls. He wanted to undermine their holy society. Witchcraft was one of his most feared weapons. A witch, in their view, was someone who had made a pact with the devil. This person gained evil powers in exchange for their loyalty to him. The Bible itself spoke of witches. "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," the scripture commanded. This passage was taken very seriously. It provided a divine justification for persecution. The political situation in the colony was also unstable. Massachusetts had recently lost its original charter from the English crown. This created a vacuum of authority. There was great uncertainty about governance. King William's War raged on the frontier. This conflict with French colonists and their Native American allies brought constant fear of attack. These political and military anxieties made people feel vulnerable. They felt their world was under siege. This sense of external threat could easily turn inward, looking for enemies within their own communities. This combination of deep religious conviction and profound insecurity was combustible. The Puritans saw the world as a battlefield. It was a struggle between God and Satan. Every event had spiritual meaning. When unexplained or frightening things happened, witchcraft seemed a plausible explanation. It offered a way to make sense of a chaotic and often hostile world. This mindset, while deeply held, laid the groundwork for the tragedy that was to come. Their fear of the unseen became a fear of their own neighbors. Salem Village in 1692 was not a united community. Deep divisions and resentments simmered beneath the surface. The village was distinct from the more prosperous Salem town. Salem town was a port, with access to trade and merchants. Salem Village was primarily an agricultural area. Its residents often felt overshadowed and economically disadvantaged by the town. This created an underlying tension between the two settlements. It also fostered internal disputes within the village itself over resources and influence. Many villagers felt their traditional way of life was under threat. Economic disparities were a significant source of conflict. Disputes over land ownership were common and bitter. Property lines were often poorly defined. Inheritance issues could tear families apart. Some families, like the Putnams, were prominent landowners in the village. They sought to maintain their status and influence. Other families felt marginalized or unfairly treated. These economic grievances fueled personal animosities. When the accusations of witchcraft began, these existing quarrels often dictated who accused whom. Old scores were settled under the guise of religious purity. Adding to the social strain were recent hardships. Smallpox epidemics had swept through New England. These outbreaks left communities weakened and fearful. Bad harvests could also lead to food shortages and economic distress. The ongoing frontier wars created a constant sense of insecurity. Refugees from these conflicts sometimes sought shelter in towns like Salem. Their presence could add to the social pressures. These collective anxieties made the community more susceptible to explanations that involved supernatural evil. Scapegoats were needed for the community's many troubles. The social structure of Salem Village was also changing. Traditional hierarchies were being challenged. Some individuals who were gaining wealth or status did not fit the old patterns. This could create resentment among established families. The role of women in society was strictly defined. Women who were assertive, independent, or did not conform to expectations were often viewed with suspicion. Many of the first accused were women who were already outsiders in some way. These social and economic fault lines made Salem Village a tinderbox. The spark of witchcraft accusations would soon ignite it. The chilling saga of the Salem witch trials began in the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. It was the winter of 1691 to 1692. His 9-year-old daughter Betty Parris and his 11-year-old niece Abigail Williams started behaving strangely. They reportedly had fits. They contorted their bodies. They uttered strange sounds and complained of being pinched or pricked by invisible forces. Soon, other young women in the village began to exhibit similar symptoms. These included Ann Putnam Jr., aged 12, and Mercy Lewis. These afflicted girls became the primary accusers. Doctors of the time could find no physical cause for the girls' afflictions. The local minister, Reverend Parris, and others began to suspect witchcraft. Under pressure to name who was tormenting them, the girls made their first accusations. The initial targets were 3 women who were already marginalized in Salem Village society. Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Parris household, was one of them. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, was another. Sarah Osborne, an elderly and bedridden woman known for disputes over property, was the third. These women were easy targets. They had little social standing or power to defend themselves. Tituba's confession proved to be a pivotal moment. Initially, she denied any involvement in witchcraft. However, after intense questioning, possibly including physical coercion, she confessed. She not only admitted to witchcraft but also spoke of other witches in Salem. She described a dark world of animal familiars and a black man who urged her to serve him. Her vivid testimony seemed to confirm the community's worst fears. It suggested a wider conspiracy of witches. This confession lent credibility to the girls' claims. It fueled the growing hysteria and set the stage for more accusations. Ann Putnam Jr. was another key instigator. Her family was influential in Salem Village. They were involved in many local disputes. Ann and her mother, Ann Putnam Sr., became prolific accusers. They named numerous individuals as witches. Their testimonies often involved detailed accounts of spectral torment. The Putnam family's support for the accusations gave the witch hunt significant momentum. The initial accusations, fueled by the girls' dramatic performances and Tituba's confession, created an atmosphere of intense fear. The community was now primed for a wider witch hunt. The belief in a demonic plot was taking firm hold. Section 5. The Specter of Justice, Trials, Torment, and Testimony. The legal proceedings that followed the accusations were far from just by modern standards. Suspects were arrested and brought before local magistrates for examination. These examinations were more like interrogations. The accused were presumed guilty. They faced immense pressure to confess. The courtroom was often chaotic. The afflicted girls would writhe and scream. They claimed the accused were tormenting them spectrally even in the courtroom itself. This dramatic display heavily influenced the magistrates and the public. It created an environment where rational defense was nearly impossible. A crucial and highly controversial element of the trials was the use of spectral evidence. This referred to testimony from accusers who claimed to see the spirit or specter of the accused. They said these spirits were tormenting them or trying to force them to sign the devil's book. According to Puritan belief, The devil could not use a person's specter without their permission. Therefore, if an accuser saw someone's specter, it was considered evidence that the person was a witch. This type of evidence was impossible to disprove. The accused had no way to defend themselves against claims of what their spirit was supposedly doing. Many notable cases illustrate the injustice of the trials. Bridget Bishop was the first person to be tried and executed. She was an older woman known for her independent ways and perhaps a somewhat flamboyant dress style. She had been accused of witchcraft years earlier but was acquitted. Rebecca Nurse was a respected elderly church member. Despite much testimony to her good character, she was found guilty and hanged. Giles Corey, an elderly farmer, refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. As a result, he was subjected to peine forte et dure, pressing with heavy stones. He died after 2 days, still refusing to plead. The pressure to confess was immense. Confessing was often seen as the only way to avoid execution. Those who confessed were typically spared death, though their lives were ruined. They were expected to name other witches, further fueling the cycle of accusations. Many innocent people likely confessed under duress. They faced the terrifying choice between a false confession and certain death. The trials became a horrifying spectacle. The system was designed to confirm guilt, not to find truth. Justice was tragically absent in Salem's courtrooms. Section 6. Seeds of Doubt, the Unraveling of the Hysteria. As the summer of 1692 wore on, the number of accusations continued to climb. The jails filled with suspected witches. However, the nature of the accusations began to change. The accusers started pointing fingers at more prominent and respected members of society. They accused wealthy merchants, ministers, and even the wife of Governor William Phipps. This expansion of targets began to raise doubts. Some people found it hard to believe that so many reputable individuals could be involved in witchcraft. The credibility of the afflicted girls started to wane among certain influential figures. A growing number of ministers and educated leaders began to voice concerns. They questioned the validity of spectral evidence. Increase Mather, a prominent Boston minister and president of Harvard College, was particularly influential. In his work, Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, he argued that spectral evidence was unreliable. He famously stated, "It were better that 10 suspected witches should escape than that one innocent person should be condemned." This critique from respected figures provided intellectual ammunition for those who doubted the trial's legitimacy. The theological basis for the proceedings was being challenged. Governor William Phipps, whose own wife had been accused, became increasingly uneasy. He had initially established the Court of Oyer and Terminer to handle the witchcraft cases. However, influenced by the growing skepticism and the arguments of ministers like Mather, he took action. In October 1692, Governor Phipps ordered a halt to the proceedings of the special court. He also decreed that spectral evidence would no longer be admissible in trials. This decision was a critical turning point. Without spectral evidence, it became much harder to secure convictions. The trials did not end immediately. A new superior court was established to hear the remaining cases. However, with the exclusion of spectral evidence, most of the accused were acquitted. By early 1693, the remaining prisoners were released. The wave of hysteria had finally broken. The Salem witch hunt, which had raged for months, was effectively over. The community slowly began to emerge from the nightmare. But the process of healing and reconciliation would be long and painful. The shadow of what had happened would linger for generations. Section 7. A Scar on the Conscience, Aftermath and Apologies. The immediate aftermath of the Salem witch trials was a period of deep reflection and regret for many in Massachusetts. The community was left to grapple with the enormity of what had occurred. Families had been torn apart. Lives had been lost. The social fabric of Salem and surrounding towns was severely damaged. Those who had been imprisoned, even if acquitted, carried the stigma of accusation. The economic impact was also significant, as farms had been neglected and property confiscated or damaged. The sense of collective guilt began to set in. Over the following years, there were official efforts to make amends. In 1697, the General Court of Massachusetts ordered a day of fasting and prayer. This was for the colony to seek forgiveness for the wrongs committed during the trials. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges who presided over the trials, publicly confessed his error and guilt. He stood in church while his apology was read aloud. He asked for forgiveness from God and the community. Not all involved showed such remorse, but Sewell's actions were a significant step towards acknowledging the injustice. Further steps towards reconciliation came later. In 1702, the General Court declared the trials unlawful. In 1711, the colony passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of many of the accused. Financial compensation was also offered to the survivors and the families of the victims. However, this process was slow and incomplete. Not all victims were included in these early acts of restitution. It took many more years, even centuries, for some of the accused to be formally exonerated. The legacy of shame was difficult to erase completely. The Salem witch trials left an indelible scar on the conscience of the community and the colony. People struggled to understand how such a terrible injustice could have happened. Ministers and laypeople alike debated the causes. Some blamed the devil's direct intervention. Others pointed to the flaws in the legal process, particularly the reliance on spectral evidence. The event served as a harsh lesson about the dangers of unchecked religious extremism and mass panic. The community had to learn to live with the knowledge of its own capacity for terrible error. Section 8. Echoes in the American Psyche, the Trials in Popular Culture. The Salem witch trials have never truly faded from American memory. Instead, they have become a powerful and enduring symbol. This dark chapter has been re-examined and reinterpreted by successive generations. It continues to fascinate writers, artists, and historians. The story resonates because it touches on timeless themes. It explores fear, intolerance, the abuse of power, and the fragility of justice. The trials serve as a cautionary tale that remains relevant far beyond the 17th century. They have become a foundational story in the American narrative. One of the most famous cultural representations of the Salem witch trials is Arthur Miller's 1953 play, The Crucible. Miller wrote the play during the McCarthy era. This was a time of intense anti-communist hysteria in the United States. He used the Salem trials as an allegory for the witch hunts of his own time. The Crucible vividly portrays the atmosphere of fear and suspicion. It shows how false accusations can destroy lives. The play has become a staple of American literature and theater. It has profoundly shaped how many people understand the events of 1692. The term witch hunt itself, largely popularized by the Salem saga, has entered the common lexicon. It is now used to describe any unjust persecution of a group of people. It refers to situations where accusations are made with little or no evidence. It often involves scapegoating and public hysteria. This metaphorical use shows how deeply the lessons of Salem have been absorbed into the cultural consciousness. Whenever there is a moral panic or a rush to judgment, the specter of Salem is often invoked. It reminds us of the dangers of such collective behavior. Beyond serious historical and literary treatments, the Salem witch trials also feature in popular culture in various ways. Sometimes this is through tourism in modern-day Salem, Massachusetts. Sometimes it is through fictionalized accounts in books, films, and television shows. While these portrayals can vary in historical accuracy, they demonstrate the enduring public fascination with the events. The story of Salem continues to be a source of both horror and intrigue. It is a stark reminder of a time when belief in the supernatural had deadly real-world consequences. The echoes of 1692 still sound clearly today. Section 9, Lest We Forget, Lessons from Salem for Today. The Salem witch trials offer profound and enduring lessons. These lessons extend far beyond their historical context. They speak to fundamental aspects of human nature and society. Perhaps the most crucial lesson is about the terrifying power of mass hysteria. Salem shows how fear, when combined with a climate of uncertainty and a strong belief system, can overwhelm reason. It demonstrates how easily a community can turn on itself. The irrationality that gripped Salem serves as a stark warning against collective delusion in any era. We must always be vigilant against such forces. Another vital lesson concerns the dangers of intolerance and scapegoating. The accused in Salem were often outsiders. They were people who were different, marginalized, or unpopular. They became easy targets for the community's anxieties and frustrations. The trials highlight the tragic consequences of demonizing those who do not conform. They underscore the importance of protecting minority rights and resisting the urge to blame others for complex problems. True justice requires empathy and a commitment to fairness for everyone, not just the majority. This principle is as important now as it was then. The Salem experience also emphasizes the critical need for due process and critical thinking in legal systems. The reliance on spectral evidence, the presumption of guilt, and the pressure to confess all contributed to the gross miscarriage of justice. Salem teaches us that legal procedures must be fair, they must be based on verifiable evidence, they must protect the rights of the accused. It also reminds individuals of the importance of questioning authority and thinking critically. We should not blindly accept claims, especially when lives and reputations are at stake. Skepticism can be a safeguard against injustice. The story of Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 is not just a historical curiosity, it is a mirror reflecting potential flaws within any society. The dynamics of fear, accusation, and injustice can reappear in different forms. Modern parallels can be seen in political persecution, social media pile-ons, or the spread of misinformation leading to real-world harm. By remembering Salem, we arm ourselves with knowledge. We understand the importance of upholding justice, defending truth, and fostering compassion. Lest we forget, the shadows of Salem remind us of the constant need for vigilance to protect our shared humanity.